Hey guys, tonight we journey into a world you think you know, but trust me, you don't. The American Civil War. It's one of those chapters in history that most people can name drop confidently. You hear the words, and your mind might jump to Abraham Lincoln, blue and grey uniforms, Gettysburg, or maybe a battlefield scene from a high school documentary that smelled vaguely like a VCR. But here's the thing, what if I told you that the Civil War wasn't just tragic or pivotal, it was far deadlier, far messier, and far more uncomfortable than the textbooks let on? Not because of the gunfire alone, not because of the cannons, but because of everything else: the hospitals, the amputations, the starvation, the psychological ruin, the infections, the environmental disasters, the smell. Yeah. No one ever tells you about the smell. So before we step into this mud-soaked, blood-streaked chapter of history, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see just how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's slip together into tonight's story, tonight's journey. Why the Civil War was deadlier than you think. Because behind every tidy textbook summary is a nightmare no one cleaned up. Behind every battle, a slow death by infection. Behind every hero's charge, a field hospital soaked in pus and amputated limbs. Behind every victory, a mother wondering which part of her son might come back in the mail. And tonight, you're not a general, not a politician, not even a famous soldier. You are a nameless recruit. Maybe from Ohio, maybe from Alabama. Maybe you were a blacksmith, a farmer, or a barely shaved teenager who lied about your age. You're just someone who woke up one day thinking this war might be over by Christmas. You're about to find out what it actually means to live and die in the deadliest conflict on American soil. This is not just a war. It's a slow-motion disaster with bandages made of floor rags, with food that made rats leave in protest, and with weapons designed to ruin a body more than kill it clean. This is the real Civil War. And tonight, you're going to live it, one aching, itchy, infected moment at a time. Let's begin. You wake up cold, not the kind of cold you fix with a sweater, the kind of cold that starts in your boots, creeps up your spine, and settles in the hollow behind your eyes, a wet, bone-hungry kind of cold. You open your eyes, and for a brief, stupid moment, you hope it's fog. But no, it's just breath, your own breath, turning to mist in the morning air because there is no insulation, no stove, no windows that actually close. You're in a tent, and that's a generous word. It's a sagging patch of canvas, barely held together by rope, buttons, and collective delusion. There's mud at the seams. There's always mud. Mud in the folds of your blanket, mud under your fingernails, mud where your socks used to be before they gave up last week and disintegrated into a soft, wet paste. The ground beneath you is frozen dirt, softened by human misery. You've been sleeping directly on it for days, or is it weeks? You've lost track. Time doesn't really exist here. Only hunger and orders. The blanket covering you smells like wood smoke, mildew, and 3 different types of failure. It's not yours. Nothing here is. You borrowed it from someone who probably borrowed it from someone else, who probably died. You don't remember the last time you were dry. Not just your clothes, your skin, your soul. Around you, the camp begins to stir. Someone coughs hard enough to make your ribs ache in sympathy. Another man groans in his sleep, or maybe in the purgatory between fever dreams and consciousness. You hear a few quiet curses, a boot being flung, someone vomiting behind the tent flap. all perfectly normal. You sit up slowly, because fast movements hurt now. Your back is a tangle of pulled muscles and stubborn bruises. Your legs cramp from too many nights curled like a question mark against the cold. Your left shoulder clicks when you move it. No idea why. It started doing that after the march through the swamp, and you've decided not to ask questions your body can't afford to answer. The smell hits you next. Not just the usual body odor, though, that's certainly here in abundance, but the deeper stench. Sickness, infection, damp wool, spoiled meat, someone left too close to the fire. A combination of gunpowder, sweat, blood, and whatever passed for a latrine in this particular patch of nowhere. This is the air now. You breathe it, you sleep in it, you wear it. And if you're unlucky, you'll cough it out in clots within the week. A rat scurries across your boot. You don't flinch. Why would you? It's not the first time. The rats here are bold, well-fed, and apparently unionized. They're not afraid of you. You've probably fed them in your sleep with crumbs from your pocket and blood from your scabbed fingers. You glance at the man beside you. He's snoring, open-mouthed, covered in lice, and very possibly dead. You nudge his leg. He stirs. Not dead, just tired in a way that eats the light out of a person. You think about coffee. Then you remember there isn't any, not unless the quartermaster found some buried under a dead mule. And even then, it would have gone to the officers. You, on the other hand, will be lucky if someone didn't steal your last hardtack biscuit during the night. A horn sounds in the distance. It's not melodic. It's not inspiring. It's the sound of obligation. Time to move. Time to pretend your knees don't feel like shattered glass and that your boots don't squish when you walk. Time to face another day of drills, of mud, of possibly digging ditches for the next group of soldiers who'll be rotated in just long enough to die in them. You pull on your coat. It's too big in the shoulders and too short in the arms, and it smells like a man who died of pneumonia, which, in fairness, he probably did. You found it on a pile of discarded gear last week after the last skirmish. Still warmer than your old one, though the left sleeve is stiff with dried blood. Not your blood, not yet. You step out of the tent, and the light is blinding. The kind of light that doesn't warm, just reveals. It pours down across an encampment that looks like someone gave a child a box of toy soldiers and 1,000 pounds of wet laundry. Tents sag. Smoke rises from miserable campfires. Men stand hunched against the wind, swearing, spitting, scratching, pacing. Somewhere nearby, a chaplain is mumbling a prayer over a man whose lungs turn to soup during the night. A pair of teenagers are shoveling out the latrine trench, arguing whether it's Tuesday or Wednesday, as if it matters. The surgeon's tent smells worse than the latrines. You can see the stained sheets hung out to dry stiff as bark, crusted with fluids you no longer try to name. A mule limps past, led by a private with a haunted look in his eyes and one glove missing. You wonder what happened to the glove. You wonder what happened to the man inside those boots. You stretch, if you can call it that. Your joints creak like broken barn hinges. Your stomach groans. Your hands shake a little, either from hunger or exhaustion or the lingering echo of last week's shelling. You're not sure anymore. You think about home, about how they said the war would be short, over by Christmas. Everyone said it. Politicians, newspapers, preachers. You don't even remember which Christmas they meant. You're a ghost wearing a blue coat. Or grey. Depends on which side you ended up on. Doesn't really matter. The lice are bipartisan. The dysentery doesn't check your uniform. The bullets are impartial. And the war doesn't care who you are. It just asks for your body. And in return, it gives you mornings like this, where survival is a quiet miracle, and waking up is just the first battle of the day. You survived the night, technically, You're vertical. Your heart's still beating. Your boots are still well present. You're not sure if they're on the correct feet, but that's a tomorrow problem. Now comes the next trial. Breakfast. You shuffle toward the campfire like a man much older than you are, which is ironic because you're 19, maybe 20, but your knees creak like they've lived through 4 winters too many, and your back whispers cruel little threats every time you stand too straight. Around the fire, there's already a small crowd, half awake, half irritated, fully hollow-eyed. A corporal is trying to get a pot of something boiling. You think it might be coffee, but then you remember, coffee ran out weeks ago. It's probably roasted cornmeal or some other creative substitute. If it's hot and vaguely brown, it passes for coffee now. You're handed a tin cup. It's warm. That's the only compliment you can give it. You sip and immediately regret it. The liquid tastes like someone filtered burnt wood through a boot and added a hint of rat. But you swallow it anyway, because warmth is more valuable than flavor. Next comes breakfast, a term that feels generous. A square of hardtack is slapped into your hand. It's not bread, it's a weapon. Hardtack is flour, water, and regret. It's baked until it resembles a roof tile, and then stored in barrels until even the weevils give up. You wrap it against your knee to make sure it hasn't fossilized. It hasn't. Not quite. You bite down slowly. Your jaw protests immediately. Hardtack isn't chewed so much as negotiated. If you're lucky, it'll soak in your spit long enough to crumble into something resembling food. If you're not lucky, you'll chip a molar. You've already lost 2 that way. There's a bit of salt pork going around. You get a chunk small, mostly fat, and suspiciously translucent. It smells vaguely of pig and strongly of something that should have been buried 3 days ago. You don't ask questions. You chew, or try to. It fights back. Sometimes there's beans. Not today. Sometimes there's molasses. You heard a rumor that one company got a whole barrel of it. You assume they traded a horse or sacrificed a lieutenant. Either way, it didn't come here. And sometimes on rare, blessed mornings, someone kills a chicken, or catches a squirrel, or trades with locals for eggs. But this morning, like most, it's hardtack and pork fat and hot disappointment. You lean against a tree, nibbling your breakfast, trying to ignore the fact that the man beside you is using his bayonet to scrape green fuzz off his ration. He shrugs and eats it anyway, because it's either that or nothing. You hear a familiar sound, a crack. A private has just broken his tooth on a biscuit. He swears creatively and throws the remains into the bushes. A squirrel sniffs it, decline, and now hygiene. You laugh quietly to yourself, not because anything is funny, but because the idea of hygiene has become a running joke among the living. There's no running water. Not here. Not really. There's a stream a quarter mile out, but it's downstream from the latrines. You learned that the hard way. Now you ration your canteen for everything drinking, rinsing, and the occasional illusion of cleanliness. You reach for your toothbrush. Wait, no, you don't have one. It broke a month ago. You've been using a rag wrapped around your finger, dipped in salt if you're lucky. The salt ran out last week. So you chew a bit of mint leaf not for freshness, but to convince yourself that your teeth are still your own. Your gums are raw. Your breath could knock over a horse. And you've got a small sore on your lip that you're pretending not to notice. Time for the morning wash. You step behind your tent, where there's a basin of greyish water left over from last night's dish scrubbing. You splash a little onto your face. It's cold, not refreshing cold bone, deep, slap you into reality cold. Your skin stings, not from the water, but from everything it touches: windburn, grime, and a thin layer of whatever that tent canvas is coated in. You use a bit of lye soap if it's still around. It smells like regret and burns like penance, but it cuts through the grease, and you tell yourself the sting is just the dirt running away. Your hands are cracked and red. Your fingernails are dark with mud, dried blood, and soot from yesterday's fire. You try to wash behind your ears. Why? You're not sure. Habit, maybe, or the ghost of your mother's voice reminding you to stay clean. Funny the things you remember out here. You inspect your socks. Dump. Again. You hang them on a stick by the fire, knowing they'll steam but never actually dry. You don't have another pair. Your boots are beginning to rot from the inside, and the lining has fused to your foot in places. A lieutenant walks by, shouting orders. You pretend not to hear. You're still wet. You're still chewing. You're still trying to summon the energy to exist. You look around and realize something odd. No one smells good. Not even close. But you've stopped noticing. The odor of the camp has become a second atmosphere. A blend of sweat, old meat, wet wool, unwashed bodies, burning hair, and sorrow. If someone were to suddenly smell of soap and lavender, you'd assume they were either a spy or about to die. You catch your reflection in a tin plate. Who is that? Gaunt cheeks, chapped lips, eyes that haven't closed properly in days. A shadow of yourself. A warning of who you might become. Or already have. There's no shaving. Razors are dull. Water is scarce. And frankly, no one cares. Facial hair is in fashion now, not by trend, but by necessity. And besides, the lice prefer a clean shave. Speaking of lice, yes, they're still here. You scratch the seam of your shirt, feel the familiar squirming. You've tried everything. Boiling your clothes, dousing them in vinegar, prayers. Nothing works. They always come back. The men joke about it. Lice are the true winners of this war. They don't take sides. They don't retreat. They thrive. You inspect your shirt one of two. It's stiff with sweat, salt, and soot. You haven't taken it off in 4 days. The armpits have developed their own weather system. You consider changing. But into what? The other shirt is worse. So you splash one more handful of water onto your face, slap your cheeks, and stand up. Ready, not clean, not full, but ready. Because the bugle's about to sound, and the captain doesn't care if your teeth fell out or your soap was stolen. The march waits for no one, and neither does death. You shoulder your gear, adjust your hat, and head toward the noise. A new day, a new trench, a new breakfast to forget by lunch. This is war. This is hygiene. This is enough. Your uniform doesn't fit. Not quite. Not really. It wasn't made for you. It was made for the concept of you. A medium man. Not too tall, not too short, not too wide, not too thin. A template stitched in haste by a factory hundreds of miles away from the battlefield. By people who will never hear gunfire or scrape lice off their collar seam. The jacket hangs oddly on your shoulders. One sleeve is too short. The buttons are mismatched. The wool is thick, scratchy, and woven with the softness of sandpaper. If you're lucky, it's grey or blue, still bright, still recognizable. If not, it's been dulled by weeks of smoke, sweat, and God knows what. It's closer to brown now, or sludge green, or misery beige. You wrap it tight in the mornings, not for fashion, but survival. The lining is thin. There's a hole under the arm. You've sewn it shut 3 times already with thread you pulled from an old sock. It keeps tearing open. You've stopped caring. Your trousers match, supposedly. Same color scheme, same general era, but they fit like borrowed clothes from a cousin who died 3 inches shorter. The knees are patched. The seat is threadbare. You've tied the waist with a bit of twine you stole from a supply barrel. You told yourself it was requisitioned. Felt better than stolen. Underneath, undergarments that haven't been white in months. Cotton, if you're lucky. worn until they've molded themselves to you like a second, less hygienic skin. You take them off only when you absolutely must, to shake out the lice, to beat off the fleas, or to scrape off whatever decided to grow between the seams. And your socks are, yes, your one brave pair. Wool, of course. Damp, of course. Always. You've tried to dry them near the fire, only to have the toes stiffen into curled, angry fists. You slide them back on each morning like punishment. The heels are worn through. Your big toe has made an escape attempt and now peeks out defiantly. You gave up mending them 2 campaigns ago. Boots? Let's not even start. They started as leather, solid, new. Now they're cracked at the soles, fraying at the seams, stiff from mud and blood and the occasional rat pee. You've stuffed newspaper inside, or what's left of a field report that nobody read. One boot lost a nail and now squeaks. The other has a pebble lodged in the heel. You've named it. Some men wrap their feet in rags to make up for the failing leather. Some go barefoot in camp, blisters be damned. But if you lose a boot, it's not replaced. You don't get a second chance. You get gangrene, or frostbite, or a kindly letter home signed with someone else's handwriting. There's a great myth among civilians that soldiers are uniform, but out here, every man's uniform tells a story. Some wear coats 2 sizes too big. Some wear civilian trousers with military jackets. Some drape themselves in captured fabric, patching blue over grey, grey over blue. Out here, colours blur, lines fade, and dignity, that peeled off weeks ago, along with your skin during the march to Petersburg. Now, let's talk about shelter. If you're lucky, and that word means something different out here, you have a tent, a canvas triangle, held up with pegs and prayers. Room enough for 2, maybe 3 men if nobody minds the smell. It leaks when it rains. It sags when the wind hits. It molds if the weather turns warm. The corners are fraying, the ropes are short, and every time you breathe too hard, dust falls from the seams into your eyes. Inside, a blanket. One, maybe shared. Maybe it was yours, once. Maybe it belonged to a man who no longer needs it. You don't ask. The ground beneath is always cold, always damp, always crawling with the knowledge that something, spider, bug, snake, or worse, may be sharing space with you tonight. If you're in the field, you don't even get that. Instead, you get a shelter half. This is exactly what it sounds like: half a tent, just one panel. To form a full tent, you need to find another soldier with the other half and hope they don't hate you, or die, or wander off with it. Many men sleep alone, under one thin sheet of fabric tied between 2 branches. It flaps in the wind like a torn flag of surrender. Some don't even bother. They wrap themselves in coats, curl under wagons, or dig into the mud like half-frozen badgers. Dirt becomes bedding. Stones become pillows. You wake up sore, damp, and covered in leaves that weren't there when you closed your eyes. If you're encamped for more than a few days, maybe you try to build something better, a log lean-to, a mud hut, a wall of branches, but you're not a carpenter. You're a soldier with 2 blisters, a dull knife, and a limited understanding of how trees work. It'll collapse in the first real storm, and when winter comes, when the snow hits, then it gets creative. Men dig holes, deep ones, lined with logs, covered in brush. They light fires in the center and sit like huddled beasts in a makeshift burrow, blinking through the smoke, hoping it doesn't snow through the ceiling again. The snow always finds a way in. Frostbite claims noses, ears, fingers, toes. Some men lose feet, others lose hope. You've seen a grown man cry because his blanket was stolen. You've seen another go mad from the cold and walk into the woods without shoes. You've tried sleeping wrapped in your coat, but wool stiffens in the frost, and buttons dig into your ribs, And every sound outside, every snapping twig, every cough feels like it might be death in disguise. Privacy? Ayoke. You sleep elbow to elbow, knee to knee, sharing body heat with people who haven't bathed since the leaves turned. You wake up with someone else's foot in your armpit. You fall asleep listening to coughs, prayers, teeth grinding, muttered dreams, and the occasional fart that could qualify as a war crime. And yet somehow, shelter becomes sacred. A dry corner of a barn, a friendly farmhouse with a warm stove, a dugout that doesn't leak. You remember these places like miracles. You remember warm walls like lovers. You remember quiet, because mostly you don't have any of it. You have cloth, you have cold, you have canvas, you have compromise, and above you, always above you, the sky, watching, waiting, open, ready to weep rain or snow or cannon fire. Because in the Civil War, you don't get armor, you don't get walls, you don't get comfort. You get what you can carry, and you carry it on your back, in your boots, and under your eyelids every time you try to sleep. You ever feel like your body isn't yours anymore? That's what war does. Not just the bullet, not just the blood. It's the labor, the endless, grinding, soul-eroding work that turns you from a person into a moving pile of aching joints and dirty fingernails. Forget the battles. They're terrifying, yes, bloody, chaotic, horrific. But most of this war, it's just work. Back-breaking, filthy, mind-numbing, endless work. You wake up sore, you go to bed sore, and in between you're swinging a pickaxe, hauling timber, digging holes, or moving something heavy from one pointless location to another because some officer said it looked too exposed. There's no rest, no rotation, no, you did enough today, soldier. Just someone shouting, someone pointing, and you shuffling, grunting, obeying. Let's say it's a trench day. The word trench sounds clean in textbooks. Strategic, tactical. On the ground, it's a ditch full of water, rats, and everything that used to be inside other people. You die with a shovel so old it might have seen the Revolutionary War. The handle's splintered. The blade is bent. You dig anyway. The dirt is wet, clumpy, and heavy. It sticks to your boots. It sticks to your soul. You toss one shovelful, then another, for hours. Your shoulders scream, your spine folds. Your hands blister, then split, then bleed. By the end, you're coated in mud from scalp to heel. You look like you've been buried and accidentally resurrected. But that's not even the worst of it. Sometimes you're not digging trenches, you're digging latrines. Yes, human-sized holes for other people's waste. The army loves sanitation. In theory, so someone's got to dig the pits, line them, cover them, move them. And if you're the unlucky soul picked for the job that day, guess what? Welcome to the worst-smelling shift of your life. And don't forget guard duty. 4 hours, 6 hours, even 12. Standing in the cold, in the rain, in the dark, trying not to blink too loud in case a sniper's got you in his sights. You don't move. You don't sit. You barely breathe. You just stare at the trees and hope they don't stare back. And then there's marching. Oh, the marching. Miles and miles. Days on end. Through mud, over hills, across rivers, down roads paved in misery and blister fluid. You carry everything. Your rifle, your cartridge box, your haversack, your bedroll, your frying pan, your tin cup, your canteen, your hatred. You walk until your feet go numb, until your socks glue themselves to your skin, until your ankles swell and your boots become medieval torture devices. Then you walk some more. No talking, no singing, just the sound of boots slapping dirt and someone coughing hard enough to lose a lung behind you. Sometimes you arrive at a destination and collapse. Other times you arrive drop your gear, and are told to build a new camp, dig trenches, gather firewood, haul water. So you do, because no isn't an option in the army. No gets you punished. No gets you latrine duty. No gets you a visit from the captain's fist or a few days tied to a wagon wheel. If you're enslaved or pressed into a labor unit, God help you. You don't even pretend to be a soldier. You're not given a weapon. You're not given boots. You're just handed a pickaxe and told to dig until your hands fall off, and then dig with your elbows. Freedmen and contrabands, black Americans escaping slavery, often ended up doing the same labor as soldiers, but without the rations, without the tents, without the promise of a letter home if they died. Their pay, if it ever came, less than half of a white soldier's. And when things went wrong, when a bridge needed building, or a cannon got stuck in the river, or a general needed a human shield, it was the laborers who were sent in first. Expendable, invisible, essential. And women, they worked too, not just nurses, though there were plenty. Bandaging limbs, emptying bedpans, wiping fevered brows with hands that hadn't rested in days, but also laundresses, cooks, menders, scavengers women who followed the armies or lived in nearby towns, dragged into the machine because somebody had to keep it turning. They mended uniforms, boiled water, baked bread, and buried the dead. Sometimes they disguised themselves as men and fought, but most just kept surviving because no one was coming to save them. Now, let's talk tools. You want gloves? Too bad. You want a better shovel? Use a bayonet. You want boots that don't chew your toes off? Learn to whittle inserts out of bark. If something breaks, you fix it. If something's missing, you improvise. If your haversack falls apart, you tie it with string. If your canteen leaks, you plug it with dirt and hope for the best. There's no gear replacement, there's no warranty, there's only you, your problem, and whatever you can, jury rig in 5 minutes using broken leather and prayer. Firewood detail, that's a fun one. Hike into the woods with an axe the size of your thigh. Chop until your arms go numb and drag back a load of wet branches while trying not to get shot by the enemy or bitten by a snake or both. The firewood never burns well. Too damp, too green. It smokes more than it flames. But you do it. Because if there's no fire, there's no food, no warmth, no hope. Sometimes you get stuck building things. Fences, barricades, coffins. Yes, coffins. Soldiers build their own when there's time. Line up a row of pine boxes like grim little shipping crates, then wait to see who fits in, which by week's end, they're usually too small, always too light. And sometimes you just have to move bodies, not the enemy's, your own. Haul them out of tents, out of trenches, off the battlefield. Drag them by the arms, by the belt, by whatever's left. Stack them like wood. Bury them shallow or not at all if the ground's too hard. You do it while holding your breath. Not because of the smell you're used to that, but because if you breathe too deep, the grief might actually kill you. You work. You suffer. You move. You serve. And when you finally sit down, when your knees give out, when your hands seize up, when your vision blurs from hunger and your stomach is gnawing itself in protest, someone calls for volunteers to dig a latrine, and you stand, because this is war. And war doesn't care about your back pain, because you're not here to rest. You're here to work yourself to death. When you've been awake for 3 nights listening to a man die by inches in the cot beside you, when your friend's leg was amputated with a saw someone just used on a horse, when the only thing standing between you and eternal silence is a half-rotted boot and a prayer you barely remember, you start to believe in anything, God, ghosts, look, dirt, whatever might explain the unexplainable, or at least keep you from screaming when the sky turns red. Religion is everywhere out here, not because it's forced, but because it's the only thing anyone has left to talk to. You see it in the pocket Bibles, small, worn, thumbed through until the paper's nearly transparent. You see it in the morning, prayers whispered by men who haven't spoken aloud in days. You see it in the chaplains, wandering from campfire to tent with soft words and tired eyes. There's a church tent sometimes, or a tree with a cross carved into it, or just a spot in the grass where the men gather on Sundays to sing the same hymn their mothers sang to them when they still had all their fingers. You hum along, not because you believe the words, not exactly, but because they're familiar. And familiar means safe, and safety, out here, is the rarest faith of all. Protestants dominate the Union camps. Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians preaching salvation, sacrifice, and God's providence over blue-coated boys who don't know if they'll survive the week. In the Confederate ranks, it's much the same, though they speak more of righteousness, more of divine justice, more of a God who seems to favor gray. Ministers tell them they fight for a holy cause, that the Lord is on their side. You've heard both versions, sometimes from the same preacher, and sometimes the faith is private. You watch a Catholic soldier cross himself 3 times before firing his rifle. You see a Jewish man quietly unwrapping a scrap of matzo in the corner of the mess tent. You see black soldiers, the United States colored troops, gather to sing spirituals at night, the melodies rising like smoke above the swamp grass and gunpowder. Swing low, sweet chariot. It sounds like hope wrapped in mourning, because belief doesn't always look like stained glass windows and white linen altars. Out here it looks like muddy boots and a psalm mumbled through cracked lip. It's a hand on your shoulder before a charge. It's the last word spoken before a needle goes in and the leg comes off. It's a desperate whisper into the dirt, asking anyone to let you live. And when religion doesn't feel like enough, superstition takes over. You carry a rabbit's foot, a stone from the river, a coin from home, a button your sister gave you before you left. You rub it between your fingers before battle, like it holds the fate of your lungs in its dented little edge. Some men sew verses into their sleeves, others carve crosses into their rifle stock. One guy wears a piece of his horse's mane tied around his wrist, swears it saved him from a sniper. You don't argue. Whatever helps. There are unspoken rules in the camp. Never step over a comrade's rifle. Never eat the last piece of hardtack before a march. Never speak the name of a dead man before dusk. Not because anyone thinks it matters, but because what if it does? What if God is listening? What if the ghosts are? And the ghosts are everywhere. Every hill, every field, every trench, someone died there. You feel it in the silence between cannon blasts, in the way the wind moves wrong sometimes, in the flicker at the edge of the firelight. You swear you saw someone standing at the tree line last night, tall, still, watching. He didn't move. You blinked. He was gone. Was it a sentry or something else? You don't ask. Most men don't want to know the answer. You've seen soldiers talk to shadows, mutter into their blankets, laugh at things that aren't there. A kind of madness, maybe. Or maybe just faith dressed in rags and delusion. The line gets blurry out here. Sometimes a man gets a feeling, wakes up and says, something's off. Maybe he saw a bird land on his rifle. Maybe he dreamed of his mother's voice. Maybe he smelled honeysuckle in a place where nothing grows. You listen when he says it, because 9 times out of 10, something is off. And by sundown, someone's dead. The army doesn't like superstition. They call it nonsense, distraction, weakness. But the army also doesn't march without a flag. They don't charge without a trumpet. They bury the dead with coins over the eyes, and a prayer mumbled in 6 different accents. So maybe belief is the army. Or maybe it's the only thing the army can't ruin. You remember a chaplain once saying that every battlefield is a kind of altar, that every soldier's death is a sacrifice. It sounded poetic, noble. Then you saw what sacrifice looks like. You saw a man die with his intestines in his hands, begging for morphine that never came. Now, you're not so sure, but you still say your prayers. Sometimes, just in your head, you say them during marches, when your feet bleed and your knees scream. You say them before letters home, asking that your words arrive even if you don't. You say them when the surgeon lifts the bone saw and doesn't bother with whiskey. You say them when the cannon fire starts and your bowels go loose and your heart tries to climb into your throat. You say them for the boys who won't, because faith is the last thing war hasn't taken from you. And if it does, well, then maybe you'll believe in something else. Maybe the wind, maybe the Sunday, maybe the dirt under your fingernails, or maybe just maybe you'll believe in silence. Because in a world where everything screams, silence might be the holiest thing of all. You're hungry. You're always hungry. There is no such thing as full in camp life, only slightly less hollow. Your stomach is an aching, echoing pit, and the sound of a mess call is the closest thing to joy anyone feels around here. But let's be clear, meal doesn't mean what you think it does. There's no stew, no gravy, no roasted chicken with soft bread and a cold drink. There's salt pork again, and hardtack. Or maybe boiled beans if the supply train didn't collapse into a ravine this week. You stand in line with your tin plate, eyes dead, waiting behind 80 other men who all smell like guilt and mildew. When you reach the front, someone with a beard longer than your patience slops something beige onto your plate. Could be beans, could be lard, could be hope, congealed and salted. You sit on a stump, or a rock, or the ground. You eat fast not because it tastes good, but because flies don't wait. Hardtack again. You wrap it against your canteen to make sure it's not infested. Spoiler, it is. Little black bugs crawl out from the edges like tenants who've overstayed their lease. You flick them off, mutter something between a curse and a prayer, and chew anyway. Protein, you tell yourself. You chase it with tepid water, greenish, metallic, possibly shared with a dead mule 5 miles upstream. You don't care. You drink it. Because thirst hurts worse than fear. Now let's talk about spoilage. Food spoils fast in the summer. Everything smells like rot. The meat arrives grey. The bread mouldy. The cheese slick with its own existential despair. And in winter, everything freezes solid. Including you. You once broke a tooth trying to eat frozen salt pork. You bled for a day. No one noticed. Sometimes a wagon from the Sanitary Commission arrives. Big box of donated food, condensed milk, canned peaches, real coffee. You cry a little. So does everyone else. And then it's gone. You know what else is gone? The spoons. They vanish constantly into pockets, into ditches, into the greedy hands of whoever's closest to the crate. You once ate beans with a stick. You once drank molasses from a sock. You're not proud of it, but you did it. Because food isn't about dignity anymore. It's about calories. And then, after the meal, comes the closest thing to a social life you'll get out here. Men light up pipes, roll cigarettes with newsprint. If someone has a harmonica, it comes out. If someone has a fiddle, oh God, you might actually feel something for a moment. The songs are old. Folk tunes, spirituals, marching songs. Some are bawdy. Most are sad. You hum along. Maybe you sing. Maybe you tap your foot. Maybe you just close your eyes and pretend for 3 minutes that the world isn't ending one infection at a time. Some men gamble cards, dice, matches, buttons, anything they can bet. They play for rations, for tobacco, for bragging rights. One guy bet his boots once. Lost. Marched barefoot for a week before getting trench fever and passing out in the latrine. Still worth it, he said. Some write letters. Quiet corners of the camp fill with the sound of scratching pens. The letters are lies, mostly. I'm well. We're winning. Hope to be home by Christmas. You fold your own letter carefully, smudged with soot and sweat. You hand it to the courier and wonder if it'll get past the censors, or the rain, or the rats. You wonder if your mother will cry when she reads it. You wonder if she'll read it before or after they send the one that says you're gone. Now, the entertainment gets darker. Sometimes there are fistfights over nothing, a blanket, a card game, a rumor. Men snap out here. They snap in silence, then with fists, then, sometimes, with knives. You've seen a man stabbed over a spoon. You've seen another laugh as he bit someone's ear off in a wrestling match gone feral. No charges, just a bandage and a new nickname, Chewer. But not all of it is madness. Some men tell stories, long ones, stupid ones, ghost tales, hunting yarns, childhood memories, polished to a high shine. Everyone becomes a storyteller out here because stories are a way to stay human. You tell one about the time you fell in a well and blamed the neighbor's dog. It's not funny, but the way you tell it is. The men laugh. Even the ones who never laugh. You feel warm for the first time in a week. Then someone passes a jug. Corn whiskey maybe, Applejack. Maybe just kerosene filtered through a sock and called medicine. It burns going down. It burns coming back up. But for one glorious hour, your muscles go quiet. Your brain lets go. The lice feel like they're dancing instead of biting. And then, singing, drunk singing, off-key, too loud, full of harmonies that don't exist. You don't care. You join in. Your throat is raw, but your soul lifts, because this is the only moment you've had in days where you weren't scared, cold, or in pain. Just loud. Just alive. And then the laughter dies. The bottle empties. The fire burns low. And everyone remembers that in the morning they might have to kill someone, or be killed. The songs taper off. The conversations fade. The cards are folded. The men crawl back into their rags and holes and canvas flaps, clutching whatever scraps of comfort they can find: a letter, a pipe, a filthy bit of string their kid once tied around their wrist. The camp goes quiet, and you sit for a moment longer, staring at the embers. You think about the man you shot last week. You think about how he looked just like your cousin. Same eyes, same nose. You drink the last of the grey water. You lay down in the dirt, and you dream not of victory, not of parades, not of glory. You dream of a warm kitchen, a soft bed, and bread that doesn't break your teeth. You dream of silence and a full stomach. Out here, death doesn't come in heroic charges or cavalry clashes beneath fluttering flags. Death comes quietly. It comes coughing, sweating, groaning on the end of a spoon, in a drop of water, in a splinter that never healed right. You came here thinking the enemy would kill you, but it's your own body that's trying to finish the job, because in this war, you are far more likely to die of disease than a bullet, and you can feel it, creeping in, gnawing at you. Soft at first, a chill, a headache, a sore throat. You brush it off, but then you start sweating, shaking. Your stomach turns against you. Your joints feel like rusted hinges. And you know, you've seen this before. You saw it in the man who stopped eating, in the one who couldn't stop vomiting, in the boy who asked for his mother and forgot where he was. You've heard it, the gurgle in the lungs, the wheezing that ends in silence. You're not afraid of being shot. You're afraid of being left behind. Let's start with camp fever, known now as typhoid. You get it from contaminated water, latrines dug too close to the stream, cooks who never wash their hands. You drink, you die. Slowly, fever takes over. You burn from the inside out. Your mind goes first, then your guts. You sweat through your uniform until you can't sit up. You rot while breathing, and there's no cure, just water, rest, and hope, which means no hope at all. Dysentery is worse. They call it quickstep. You hear that word whispered in tents and trenches like a curse. It empties your body from both ends until you're a skeleton wrapped in wet cloth. You stop walking. You stop talking. You lie in a puddle of your own waste, too tired to ask for help, too weak to care if anyone's watching. The stench never leaves. Then there's malaria. You shake, you sweat, you freeze. Your skin turns yellow, your eyes glassy. One day, you're carrying a rifle. The next, you're too weak to lift a spoon. And once it takes hold, it never really leaves. You see men crawl back from malaria, but they're never the same. They move slower. They speak softer. Their hands shake, even in sleep. But worst of all, the infections. Oh, God. The infections. You step on a nail. You scrape your knee. You get a blister from your boot. And within a week, your leg swells like a sausage and starts to smell like meat gone wrong. Gangrene. It spreads fast. First green, then black, then soft, like pudding. And then it starts to hum, like it knows. You go to the surgeon's tent. You pray he's not drunk. You pray the saw is sharp. If you're lucky, they cut it off high enough to stop the rot. If you're unlucky, they cut and it still kills you. And if you're really unlucky, they cut and you live. You live with half a leg, half an arm, half a face, and still get sent back to the front line with a smile and a pat on the back, because nothing stops the war. The surgeon's tent is a horror of its own. A large white canvas stained red, tables too narrow, buckets of limbs, flies, always flies. The tools? A saw, a knife, a clamp, a rag to bite down on. There's no anesthesia, not for you. If you're important, maybe you get chloroform. If not, you get whiskey and a friend to hold your shoulders while the doctor cuts through skin, tendon, and bone. You scream. Everyone screams. Some scream so hard they rupture blood vessels in their eyes. You pass out. If you wake up, you're lucky, or not, because the pain never leaves. Your stump itches, burns, throbs. You cry yourself to sleep. If you sleep, infection is always waiting. Around the bandage, inside the stitch, on the dirty hands of the nurse who has 20 other patients and no gloves. Sterilization doesn't exist. They wipe the sore on their apron, then move to the next man. That apron, soaked, brown at the edges, crusted with other people's endings. You try not to look, try not to listen to the groans, the begging, the way someone whimpers, please, over and over, like a broken prayer wheel. Sometimes the surgeon sings, not because he's happy, but because the humming helps him forget the sound of snapping bone. Now, fear. Let's talk about fear. Fear of death isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's the way you sit still for an hour, watching your hand tremble and wondering if it's the fever. It's the way you memorize the number of men in your tent each night and notice when that number changes. It's the way you say goodbye to someone without using the word. It's hearing a man say, "I don't feel right," and knowing he'll be cold by morning. It's pretending the blood in your stool is just something I ate. It's hiding a cough until it chokes you in your sleep. It's digging graves before you know who they're for. It's watching a friend get better, walk around, laugh, and then drop dead the next day from something in his gut. It's wondering if anyone will remember you when the letters stop. If your family will get your name spelled right on the marker. If you'll even get a marker. You don't fear bullets. You fear being unrecognizable. You fear being dumped in a ditch with 100 others, a mass grave, a shallow pit, a line in a journal, private, unknown, deceased. Sometimes you hear that someone survived a wound, made it home, married, had a shot. You smile, but it's a thin smile, because for everyone like him, you know 20 others who screamed for their mothers and died with a boot still tied around their neck. Sometimes you see a man try to walk away from the camp, quietly, holding his chest, tears in his eyes. He knows, he feels it coming, and he doesn't want to die here, not in the mud, not under flies, not surrounded by strangers. So he walks into the woods, slowly, calmly, and you never see him again, and no one talks about it, because there are no words. Just another grave to dig, just another body to carry, just another sunrise to pretend you're not next. You think the war is just in the camps, just in the gun smoke and the blood, but it isn't. It's at home on the porches, in the fields, in the kitchens, in the cradle of every house that used to hold peace. The war rips through families like shrapnel. It doesn't care how old you are, what gender you are, or whether you picked up a musket. It arrives in the form of absent. You are gone. And back home, someone is still trying to live like that. Means nothing. Let's talk about women. They are everywhere in this war, just not always on the front lines. They're on farms now, alone, ploughing, planting, harvesting work they were never expected to do, now thrust upon them because the men are gone. The war doesn't care that your hands were raised for sowing, not scything. It doesn't care if you're pregnant. If you're 16 or 60, you do the work or the family doesn't eat. Many women didn't just manage homes, they became nurses. Not always trained, not always wanted by the army, but needed desperately. In Union hospitals, they cleaned pus from wounds with bare hands. They held down fevered men who screamed for mothers that had been dead for 20 years. They wiped brows, wrote letters for the dying, and folded up uniforms that would never be worn again. Some, like Clara Barton, built legacies. Others died of the same diseases they tried to cure, and many didn't have the luxury of a hospital. Some women followed the camps, camp followers, they were called, though the name hides more than it reveals. Some were laundresses, some cooks, some wives or widows. Some simply had nowhere else to go. They lived in tents, in wagons, sometimes in barns, with their children wrapped in rags, hoping the army would at least offer a crust of bread. Others turned to prostitution, not because they wanted to, but because survival sometimes doesn't care about shame. Some women fought, disguised as men, bound their chests, cut their hair, signed up under names like Sam, or Charlie, or Frank. They fought, they bled. Some even died their secret, only discovered when their body was laid out under canvas. History barely remembers their names, but they were there. And then there were the women enslaved, black women on plantations left behind when the white men marched off to war. Some fled, some didn't, some tried and were dragged back in chains. Some were raped, forced to bear children they never asked for, and watched sons sold off like bushels of wheat. When Union armies moved through the South, some enslaved women followed behind, walking barefoot for miles, cooking, cleaning, nursing. They weren't paid, they weren't free, not truly, but they hoped, prayed, carried babies on their hips, and chopped firewood with their free hands. And when freedom finally came, many had nothing, no land, no money, no names on a deed. Just the hope that maybe, finally, their children would know something better. Let's talk about those children. Children didn't watch the war from afar. They were in it. Boys as young as 10 joined as drummer boys or messengers. Some lied about their age and carried rifles barely shorter than they were. They marched, they watched men die. They died. Some carried stretchers. Some reloaded weapons. Some picked up the guns of dead men and kept firing. They weren't soldiers, not officially, but death didn't check IDs. Back home, the children left behind grew up fast. A 7-year-old might be head of the household now, feeding livestock, digging potatoes, watching over younger siblings while their mother stitched uniforms or cried over letters. School stopped for many. Playtime disappeared. Toys replaced by chores. Laughter replaced by whispers behind closed doors about ration shortages and coughing fits, and that neighbor boy who went off and never came back. Some children never understood what was happening, only that dad was gone, and mom cried more now, and everyone wore black. Others understood too much, especially the children enslaved in the South working the fields, tending the babies of their enslavers, learning from an early age to survive silence. And the families of soldiers? Scattered. Letters arrived, or they didn't. They were read and reread until the paper fell apart. Some women kept them folded in aprons, pressed to their hearts like the man himself was still inside the envelope. Sometimes what came wasn't a letter but a box, a wooden one, with no explanation. Sometimes a name carved in, sometimes not, and that was it. No funeral, no goodbye, no chance to touch his face or close his eyes or say, "You were loved." Sometimes what came home was just a coat, or a sack of personal items, or a vague report of missing. How do you grieve someone who may be out there still, bleeding in a ditch, crying for you? Some women couldn't take it. You heard stories. A woman in Pennsylvania who lit a candle every night for a husband who died in Georgia. A mother in Mississippi who wore black for the rest of her life and spoke only in whispers. A girl who waited by the train station every Sunday for a father who'd been buried 2 years ago. And then there were the women who did move on, who remarried, who stopped waiting, who learned how to survive in a world that kept burning. And for that, they were judged. Because grief, apparently, comes with rules. But love didn't disappear in war. It just changed. It showed up in half-burnt letters, in hand-sewn socks stuffed into haversacks, in songs hummed by candlelight, in a name scratched into a tree trunk by a soldier, hoping someone might find it one day and say, he mattered. Family wasn't just blood anymore. It was whoever kept you alive. The man who pulled you out of the mud when you collapsed on the march. The woman who gave you extra cornmeal because you looked thin. The drummer boy who never spoke, but always sat beside you when you couldn't stop shaking. The nurse who wrote your letters when your hands gave out. They were your brothers, your sisters. Your only proof that you once existed in a world that wanted you gone. Because the war didn't just kill bodies, it killed futures. And the ones left behind, they lived in the wreckage, trying to rebuild homes with empty chairs at every table, trying to sing lullabies over the sound of memory, trying to remember how to be whole again. It's mid-afternoon now. The sun is high, but it brings no comfort, just sweat. The kind that clings to your lower back, soaks into your wool coat, and makes your socks squish inside your boots. The kind of heat that turns canvas tents into ovens and tempers into tinder. You're tired. You've been tired for days. But this is the kind of tired that makes your bones itch. The kind that turns men sour, even good men. And there's nowhere to put that anger except outward. So this is when the fights start. You hear shouting by the mess tent. 2 privates going at it over a blanket, or maybe it was a game of cards. Or maybe it was just the heat and the smell and the endless nothingness of waiting. A punch is thrown. Then another. No one stops it. Not at first. They need it like a show, like theatre, like proof that you still have something inside you worth fighting over. Then an officer strolls over, mutters a few words, and the men are pulled apart. One gets tied to a post for an hour, wrists bound, back straight, face red with shame. He doesn't fight it. Punishment is just another part of the schedule now. Like rations, like blisters, you head back to your tent, or where your tent used to be, before a windstorm collapsed it and no one helped you fix it. You sit in the dirt and watch a trail of ants crawl over your last hardtack biscuit. You don't stop them. Justice doesn't really exist out here. Not the kind that fits cleanly inside laws or uniforms. Disputes are handled with fists, threats, or silence. If you're white, poor, and loud, you might get punished. If you're black, you're lucky if anyone listens at all. Discrimination is everywhere. Even in the so-called Army of Freedom, black soldiers are given duller tools, worse food, fewer boots. They're paid less, sometimes nothing, and when they complain, they're labeled ungrateful. They march just as far, they die just as fast. But when the fighting's over, they're sent back to dig ditches. The officers say it's because they're not trained. Funny how no one teaches them then. You hear a group of white soldiers mocking them one afternoon, cruel jokes, the same tired insults. One of the black men looks over, says nothing. You think about standing up. You don't. Because in this place, conscience gets you a black eye. Or, worse, extra duty. There's no moral victory in the latrine trench. The officers, too, are a different breed. Some are brave, noble, bleeding just like the rest of you. Others, they sit in tents, sipping whiskey, signing papers that send boys to die, then ask for cleaner linens from the quartermaster. You hear rumors about promotions bought with bribes, about surgeons who sell morphine on the side, about paymasters who vanish with months of back wages and reappear in New York with a new name and a fat bank account. Meanwhile, you haven't seen $1 in 3 months, but you still mark, you still dig, you still fight, because the war doesn't care if you're paid. The war only cares that you show up. There's conflict even between the North and the North, the South and the South. Some Union soldiers are abolitionists, true believers, fighting to end slavery. Others, not so much. They're here to save the Union, not the Negro. You've heard them say it out loud. And Confederate soldiers, not all slaveholders. Some don't even own land. Some fight because their cousins did, because their preacher told them to, because the town called them a coward when they tried to stay home. And they hate their own officers too. They march without shoes, eat boiled acorns, watch their sisters' farms get burned by the same army they fight beside. Morale doesn't come from flags, it comes from food, from fairness, from the fantasy that maybe, just maybe, someone out there gives a damn about whether you live or die. Spoiler, they don't. So you turn to each other and then turn on each other. Immigrants get the worst of it. Irishmen, Germans, Polish. They joined to earn respect, maybe citizenship. But in the camp, they're called names, treated like second-class soldiers, accused of cowardice before they even reach the battlefield. You see it happen. A German boy, barely 18, speaks broken English. He gets laughed at, taunted. When he finally snaps and punches someone, he gets whipped, not the man who mocked him, just him, because order must be maintained. But justice? That's optional. You've seen soldiers arrested for stealing bread, and officers walk free after assaulting a laundress. You've seen deserters hanged, shot, left to rot as warnings. One afternoon, you help dig a grave for a man who ran, said he was going to see his wife, said the war had taken enough from him. They caught him 3 days out, tied him to a tree, blindfolded him, shot him in the heart. The chaplain said a few words. The colonel said, "Let that be a lesson." You helped lower him into the dirt. That night, you couldn't sleep. You stared at the stars and wondered how close a man has to get to breaking before the war calls him a criminal for trying to stay human. But it's not all violence and tension. Sometimes there's laughter. It's rough, wild, inappropriate, but it's real. A man tells a joke so filthy it makes the priest blush. Another juggles potatoes. Someone draws caricatures of the general on the side of the latrine. You laugh, loud, tears down your face, because if you don't laugh, you'll scream. And you're afraid that if you start screaming, you might never stop. The afternoon drags on. You carry water, you mend a strap, you clean your rifle with the last scrap of cloth that doesn't smell like death, and you watch. You watch the petty cruelty, the undeserved punishments, the men who snap, the ones who survive, the ones who disappear. You see everything, because even when your body is exhausted, your mind keeps watching. It doesn't stop. And when the sun finally begins to sink, you don't feel relief. You feel suspicion, because nightfall is worse. Night doesn't fall in camp, it seeps, like ink through cloth, like blood through gauze. The sun drops behind the hills, and suddenly the world feels thinner, like the sky forgot how to hold itself up. The fire dims, the men grow quiet, voices lower into whispers, because night doesn't just bring sleep, it brings fear, and you feel it. It curls around your ankles like mist. It sits heavy in your chest. Your heartbeat slows, but your breath gets shallow. You're still, but you're alert, because everything changes when the light is gone. The campfire crackles. You stare into it like it's a lifeline, the only warm thing left on earth. The glow doesn't reach far, but it's enough to keep your hands from shaking, just barely. You hear things in the dark. Owls, wolves, a branch snapping, or was that a footstep? Someone coughs behind you, and you jump. Silly, you knew they were there. But at night, everything feels sharper, louder, closer. You keep your rifle nearby, loaded, one in the chamber, just in case. There's always a just in case, because nighttime is when the raids happen. You've heard the stories. Men pulled from their tents with knives to the throat, scouts crawling through the trees, slipping past pickets, fires lit in empty camps to trick the enemy into shelling their own. Once, a Confederate regiment disguised themselves in Union coats and walked right through a checkpoint, killed 8 men in their sleep. Now, everyone's paranoid. You don't sleep much anymore. Not real sleep. Not the kind that heals. You doze. You nap. You slip into shallow dreams where the sky is on fire and you're trying to scream, but no sound comes out. You've been told to sleep with your boots on, just in case you have to run, just in case you have to fight, just in case you don't wake up and someone else has to carry your body to the surgeon. So you sleep in your clothes, your coat bunched under your head, your hat pulled low, your rifle across your chest, ready, always ready. But no one's ever really ready for how cold it gets. You huddle under your blanket, thin, damp, stiff at the corners. You curl into yourself like a wounded animal. You press against whoever's closest, whether you like them or not. Because out here, warmth beats pride. You pull your fingers into your sleeves. Your toes feel like glass. You worry vaguely that one of them might snap off. You hope it's a little one. Fires are kept low. Too much light makes you a target. Too much smoke gives away your position. So the flames are small, just enough to cook beans, just enough to see your breath in the glow. You used to be afraid of the dark when you were a kid. Now you're afraid of the quiet, because in the quiet, you hear everything. A man dying 3 tents away. Slow, wet, gurgling. The surgeon pacing, muttering, saw squealing. A bucket tipping over with a splash. The guy next to you whispering a prayer, or a name, or maybe just nonsense half lost in a fever that won't break. You used to be afraid of ghosts. Now you welcome them. At least ghosts don't bleed on your shirt. At least ghosts don't scream. And God, the screaming. That's what you remember most about the battles. Not the gunfire. Not the cannon blasts. The screaming. At night, it comes back. You hear it in your head like it's still happening. You wake up gasping, your hands clenched around a rifle that's not even there, your heart slamming against your ribs like it wants out. Sometimes you don't wake up, you just lie there, eyes open, heart racing, watching the shadows crawl across the tent flap. And then there's fire, accidental fires. Someone knocks over a lantern, or gets careless with embers. One spark on dry canvas, and the whole row of tents goes up like kindling. You've seen men burn, you've smelled it, you've watched a friend stagger out of the flames, skin hanging from his arms, hair smoking. You knew he wouldn't make it. You didn't tell him. And then there's rats. They own the night. You feel them crawling across your legs. You flinch, but not too much. You don't want to wake the others. You once saw one drag off someone's biscuit while he was eating it. Another chewed through a man's ear while he was unconscious. No one was surprised. And still, you fear the rats less than what's coming at dawn. Because if it's battle tomorrow, tonight might be your last. You don't talk about that. Not out loud. But everyone knows. There's a certain kind of silence in camp the night before a battle. Not peaceful, not calm. It's a held breath. No singing, no cards, no joke. Just men checking their letters, folding them, tucking them into their shirts where someone might find them. You do the same. Yours is short, to the point. If I don't make it, I love you. Tell Ma I'm sorry. You don't sign it. They'll know. You clean your rifle one last time, not because it'll help, but because it gives your hands something to do besides shape. You eat, you drink, you sit by the fire, and you wonder what death feels like. Does it hurt? Does it happen fast? Will you know? Or will it be like sleep, soft, sudden, distant? And who will find you? A friend? An enemy? A stranger with a shovel? You wonder where your body will end up. In a shallow grave? In a pile? In a ditch with a number instead of a name? You tell yourself it doesn't matter, but it does. It does. And then finally, exhaustion wins. You close your eyes. You drift off. Not peacefully. Not fully. Just enough. Enough to forget where you are. Enough to dream of home. Enough to not hear the scream when someone dies just before dawn. So here you are, still breathing. The fire has burned down to a glow. The men are quiet again, not sleeping, just drifting. Half asleep, half awake, stuck between exhaustion and instinct. And you lie there in your coat, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, listening to the wind brush softly through the trees. You made it through another day. That alone is a kind of miracle out here. Because now you know this war wasn't just rifles and generals and flags flapping dramatically on hillsides. No, it was far more brutal than that. Far more boring too. And boring is what made it deadly. It was the endless digging, the endless waiting, the way your body broke down one blister, one missed meal, one sleepless night at a time. It was the hunger, the rot, the swampy stink of wet wool and sour meat, the dysentery that didn't care what side you were on, the amputations done with a saw and a prayer, the endless parade of limbs that once belonged to men who had names, homes, families. It was a child crying in the next cot over, a letter home written in shaking hands, a scream in the dark that nobody wanted to answer. It was all the things the history books don't tell you. The crushed toes, the toothaches, the lice that burrowed into your collar, the taste of spoiled coffee made from burnt chicory and lies, the jokes that turned bitter halfway through the punchline. And it was the waiting. God, the waiting. For food, for orders, for medicine, for letters, for the shell to drop, for the bleeding to stop, for someone to say, "It's over." But it wasn't over. Not for years. And when it did finally end, it didn't really end. Not for the people who lived it, not for the ones who came back. Because the battlefield follows you home. It follows you into your dreams, into the creak of floorboards, the crack of thunder, the sharp scent of vinegar that reminds you of the surgeon's tent. It follows you into the silence, the space between words, where memory still clings like smoke. You don't forget, you carry. And now, lying here beneath the stars, you feel it all. The weight of the uniform, the hunger in your belly, the ache in your knees, the stories etched behind your eyes. You remember the faces, not famous ones, not generals, not presidents, but them, the boy who gave you his last biscuit, the man who didn't wake up, the nurse who never stopped moving even after her voice went hoarse, the friend who sang even after the shell took his leg. They're still with you, and they always will be. Because history isn't made by the names carved into marble. It's made by the ones who were forgotten, the ones who marched, coughed, bled, and died quietly. The ones who asked for nothing but a warm meal and a chance to get back home in one piece. They didn't ask for glory. They asked for socks without holes. They asked for boots that fit. They asked not to die alone in the mud. And tonight, as the wind picks up and the camp settles into that heavy, haunted silence, you think about how far we've come, how far you've come. You think about clean water and antiseptic and doctors who wash their hands. You think about warm beds and soft pillows and teeth that don't fall out by age 20. You think about how modern life, all its mess, all its noise, is still 1,000 times gentler than what you lived through today. And it makes you grateful, quietly, deeply, almost painfully, because you don't have to wake up in 1863. You don't have to hear the surgeon sharpening his saw outside your tent. You don't have to eat salt pork that smells like feet. You don't have to march on broken boots until your toenails turn black and fall off. You don't have to stare into the eyes of a man who used to be your friend and realize you don't remember his name. You get to sleep, you get to be warm, you get to be safe, and that is no small thing. So breathe deeply now. Let your jaw unclench. Let the stiffness leave your shoulders. Close your eyes. Feel the mattress beneath you, the pillow supporting your head, the clean blanket, the gentle hum of the fan, the quiet safety of the room around you. Let it hold you. Let yourself be here, because the war is over. Not just that war, but your war. The war of your thoughts, your worries, your weight, your to-do lists, your fears. It's over for tonight. You've heard the worst of it. You've lived through the cold and the rot and the sadness, if only in your imagination. And you're still here, still breathing, still safe. So tonight, as you drift off, remember, you don't have to wake up in a soldier's tent. You don't have to chase rats from your boots or scrape maggots from a wound. You don't have to listen to the surgeon sing over the sound of a saw. You get to rest. You get to forget. You get to let go. And if you wake in the middle of the night, just remember, you're not in the mud. You're not under fire. You're not alone. You're home. So sleep well, friend. The war is over now.